Marie Magdalene Dietrich was born on December 27, 1901, in Schöneberg, Berlin. Her father was a Royal Prussian police lieutenant who died when she was around 6 years old. Her mother then married a cavalry officer named Eduard von Losch, who was killed in the First World War. Two fathers, both military men, both gone before she was a teenager. Her mother, Wilhelmina, was strict and from a well-off jeweler's family. She ran the household the way she ran everything, with expectations. The young Marlene studied violin seriously, practicing Bach sonatas and aiming at a concert career. Britannica says she later pretended to injure her wrist as an excuse to stop, having already discovered the pull of Berlin's nightlife. Whether wrist injury or convenient exit, she left the conservatory path behind and didn't look back. Berlin in the early 1920s was a city in freefall. Inflation was destroying savings overnight, the Weimar Republic barely holding, and the cultural response to all that instability was extraordinary. Cabarets, expressionist theater, open queer nightlife, political satire sharper than anything that had come before. Dietrich moved through all of it. She enrolled in Max Reinhardt's Deutsche Theaterschule in 1921. She took small roles on stage and in silent films across the early 20s. She was watching how it all worked, learning what she needed. She married Rudolf Sieber in May 1923. He was a casting director she'd met on the set of a film. Their daughter Maria was born in December 1924. The marriage lasted on paper until Sieber died in 1976, but they stopped living together within 5 years of the wedding. What followed wasn't a divorce or a scandal. It was something stranger, and by most accounts genuinely functional. Sieber had a long-term companion named Tamara Matul. Dietrich had a string of affairs with both men and women throughout her life. They wrote each other constantly, and she supported him financially for decades. He was her closest confidant until he died. Her breakthrough came in 1930, through director Joseph von Sternberg. He saw her in a Berlin review and cast her as Lola in Der Blaue Engel, the Blue Angel. She played a cabaret singer who destroys a respectable professor. She was 28 years old, and the performance made her famous across Europe in weeks. Paramount Pictures signed her and brought her to Hollywood, with von Sternberg attached. The films they made together, Morocco, Dishonored, Shanghai Express, Blonde Venus, The Scarlet Empress, The Devil is a Woman, were visually extraordinary and commercially mixed. He lit her obsessively and directed her like she was an object he'd invented. She absorbed his visual language and fought him constantly over control. What was actually happening on screen during this period was genuinely strange for its time. In Morocco, her character walked on stage in a man's tuxedo and top hat, took a flower from a woman in the audience, kissed her on the mouth, and tossed the flower to Gary Cooper. That scene was Dietrich's own idea. When censors tried to cut it, she argued that cutting the kiss would make the appearance of the flower in Cooper's hand nonsensical. The scene stayed. She also wore trousers off-screen, which in 1932 was enough to get you threatened with arrest. The Los Angeles police reportedly did exactly that. She wore them anyway. By 1937, the partnership with von Sternberg had ended, and her box office numbers had fallen badly. On May 4, 1938, the Independent Theater Owners Association published a full-page ad in The Hollywood Reporter. It named several stars whose recent films had failed commercially. The ad specifically stated that Dietrich too is poison at the box office. The phrase stuck and was attached to her name for years afterward. She was grouped with Greta Garbo, Katharine Hepburn, Joan Crawford, and others. The list reads now like a Hall of Fame. At the time, it was a genuine professional humiliation. Then came Destry Rides Again in 1939 for Universal. She played a saloon singer named Frenchie opposite James Stewart, and she was funny in a way her Sternberg years had never allowed. Critics treated it like a revelation. The film gave her a second act in Hollywood and demonstrated that she could do more than inhabit a frame. Around that same stretch of years, the Nazis had been making overtures. She later said that in 1937, while in London filming for producer Alexander Korda, she was approached by Nazi party officials who offered lucrative contracts if she would return to Germany as a foremost German star. She turned them down. She applied for American citizenship in 1937 and became a citizen in 1939. When the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor, she threw herself into the effort with unusual seriousness. She was one of the first celebrities to tour selling war bonds and is estimated to have raised over $1 million on her own. Then came the USO tours. She went twice. The first tour covered North Africa and Italy. where she was reportedly the first entertainer to reach rescued Allied soldiers at Anzio. The second tour lasted 11 months, beginning just after D-Day, taking her through France and Germany. Her fellow performers joked that she was always trying to get them killed. She kept pushing toward the front lines. She sang, she did a comedy routine, she played a musical saw. She visited wounded soldiers in hospitals in Belgium, in the United States, overseas. The Smithsonian Institution records that 2 American generals independently nominated her for the Medal of Freedom. It was awarded to her in November 1947. France gave her the Légion d'honneur the same year. She valued these above any acting recognition she ever received. Her mother had stayed behind in Germany during the war. Contact between them was nearly impossible. Dietrich didn't get back to her until after the German surrender, and the relationship between them was complicated in ways that seem never to have fully resolved. Back in Germany, she was not celebrated. She was despised by a significant portion of the population who saw her wartime work as a betrayal. The Nazi propaganda magazine Der Stürmer had called her un-German as far back as 1939. When she toured Germany in 1960, protesters picketed with signs demanding that Marlene go home. She was home. That was the point, and the cruelty of it. The post-war film career was real and sometimes very good. A Foreign Affair, Stage Fright, Witness for the Prosecution, Touch of Evil, Judgment at Nuremberg. That last one deserves a moment. Stanley Kramer's 1961 film about the Nazi war crimes trials had an enormous cast. Dietrich played the widow of a German general, and her total screen time was small. The nomination she received for it was not a courtesy. Watch the scenes. She does almost nothing visible and holds every frame she's in. But film was becoming secondary. Starting in 1953, when she debuted at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas, she built a second career as a concert performer that would run for over 2 decades. The act was entirely her own construction. She designed the lighting herself. The gowns, made by designer Jean-Louis, were heavily beaded soufflé creations that gave the illusion of near transparency. Marilyn Monroe was so taken with the concept that she asked Jean-Louis for a version of her own. The dress Monroe wore to sing Happy Birthday to President Kennedy was built from what Dietrich had already established. She toured Las Vegas, London, Paris, and throughout the world. She was performing into her 70s. The audiences stood before she sang a note. Her private life during all these decades was full and not much of anyone's business, which was the way she preferred it. She had significant relationships with Erich Maria Remarque, Jean Gabin, Yul Brynner, and others. She was open about her attractions to both men and women, though not in the terms of public declaration that came later. She simply lived the way she lived and didn't explain herself to anyone. Her daughter Maria published a memoir after Dietrich's death. It was not gentle. Maria wrote about a mother who was possessive, emotionally consuming, and capable of treating her child as a prop or a mirror, depending on what the moment required. The book was read as an attack by some and as a reckoning by others. It reads now like both things simultaneously. A portrait of someone who gave a great deal and took a great deal more, written by someone who clearly loved her and had been genuinely damaged by her. Tamara Matul, Sieber's companion of over 30 years, developed mental illness in her later years. Sieber had her committed, and she was killed by another patient at the institution. Sieber, Dietrich, and Maria all mourned her. Rudolph died in 1976 of cancer after 53 years of marriage in every legal sense of the term. The concert career ended in 1975. During a performance in Sydney, she fell into the open orchestra pit and broke her leg. She was 73. She never performed publicly again. She retired to her 4-room apartment at 12 Avenue Montaigne in Paris and largely refused to leave it. In the early 1980s, director Maximilian Schell, who had appeared with her in Judgment at Nuremberg, proposed a documentary. She agreed, on the condition that she not be filmed. Schell made the film anyway, using archival footage while her voice plays over it. The result, released in 1984, is one of the stranger pieces of celebrity documentary ever made. She spent the whole thing trying to control it from her apartment by telephone. She was funny, sharp, vain about exactly what you'd expect her to be vain about, and occasionally said something that sounded like the truth before pulling back. She is more unguarded in that film, in which she refused to appear, than in almost anything she did on camera. She died on May 6, 1992, at 90 years old, in that apartment on Avenue Montaigne. Her funeral was held in Paris. Then her body was returned to Berlin, and buried in the Städtischer Friedhof 3 in Schöneberg, close to where she was born, next to her mother. The city that spent decades calling her a traitor named a street after her outside the Deutsche Kinemathek Film Museum. That museum now holds her costumes, her written documents, her photographs, the archive of someone who understood that controlling her own image was a form of survival, and who spent 90 years proving she was right about that.